This morning on The Real Story, we're getting an update on the human cost of the conflict in Israel and Gaza. Connecticut-based Save the Children on the ground there telling us what they're seeing, what's needed, and how a short pause in fighting has changed operations. But first, here in Connecticut, a vote that never happened. Controversial regulations that would gradually ban gas cars in the state withdrawn. What the electric vehicle infrastructure would take in the state, who should bear the cost, and what comes next. We're discussing all that and more ahead with Senator Christine Cohen. Good morning, and thanks for joining us here on The Real Story. I'm Emma Wulfhorst. A big vote was anticipated this past week on proposed regulations to phase out all new sales of internal combustion vehicles in Connecticut by 2035. But the night before that vote, the Lamont administration decided to pull these regulations from the committee's agenda. Legislators from both sides of the aisle say there are a lot of questions around electric vehicle enforcement, but leaders are still calling this just a speed bump. Joining me now to break this all down is Democratic Senator Christine Cohen, co-chair of the Transportation Committee. Good to see you again, Senator. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me, Emma. I appreciate it.
So let's talk about how this all kind of unraveled this past week. There's been a lot of pushback on these California emissions standards the state tied itself to. So from a legislative perspective, why was that decision in the first place back in 2004? And what's the importance of the state having a sort of blueprint like this?
Yeah, thanks so much for the question, Emma. And I think it's important that we set the record straight. So there's two options that we as a state have when it comes to air quality. We can either adopt California's more stringent air quality standards, or we can adopt EPA guidelines. And nearly 20 years ago, as you said, this state recognized the importance of protecting clean air by passing that public act in an overwhelmingly bipartisan fashion. We decided to follow the California emission standards for light duty vehicles. And just 2 years ago, through the Connecticut Clean Air Act, we decided to go the same route for California emission standards for medium and heavy duty vehicles, along with so many other states. So now, as we recognize our air quality problem is greater than ever, which is why countries and states are really looking to take a thoughtful approach to our future here. You know, transmission emissions continues to compromise the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions in the state, and we're just simply not meeting our targets with respect to emissions and ozone. You know, additionally, all of these air quality issues are certainly causing numerous health impacts that we're having to deal with. And so having, you asked about the regulatory framework and why that's important to have in place. Having that in place means that we're really able to join hand in hand with manufacturers, with businesses, offering consumer incentives to ensure affordability as we work towards these goals together.
And let's talk about some of the things that were sort of up in the air here and led the governor to withdraw the regulations. You know, a major one and big concern is infrastructure. This push toward electric vehicles would require a lot of infrastructure investments. You know, several people have warned the state and even national government that grid capacity is an issue. The Transportation Committee discussed this last session, but it's going to take a kind of a cross-committee approach, right?
It absolutely is. And just like when we passed Connecticut's Clean Air Act, we work together with both the Environment and Transportation Committees. We'll have to work with the Energy and Technology Committee. We'll be working with the administration as well as the agencies, particularly DEP and DOT. There is in place in the state of Connecticut an electric vehicle roadmap. This is well thought out, well planned. There's also been a PURA docket, with a 9-year program to really implement this. We're seeing unprecedented funds from the federal government to really put in that EV charging infrastructure across the state of Connecticut. So this isn't something that's going to happen overnight. We're not going to flip a switch and all of a sudden next year combustible engines will no longer be available. There are still going to be combustible engines on the market. We're looking towards 2035 to stop the sale of new combustible engines, but that again doesn't mean that they're not going to be available for the next 12 years. It doesn't mean that they're not going to be available after 2035, certainly on the used car market. It also doesn't mean that hybrids are impacted by this. We have a lot of hybrid vehicles, which is obviously a combination of combustible and electric vehicle on the market today. More are coming to market. And we don't talk a lot about fuel cell vehicles either, hydrogen vehicles. Those are will still be available. And I think that technology is coming on the scene. We're really starting to see manufacturers take a look at whether or not they want to put their dollars behind fuel cell as well. So I think, there's a lot at play here, but I think it's important to recognize that this isn't something that's going to happen overnight. We've been taking a thoughtful approach to this for the last 2 decades. We will continue to take a thoughtful approach to this, and we have a roadmap to get us there, working hand in hand with the utilities, of course, with ISO to make sure that we have the capacity available, to make sure consumers can get these cars at affordable prices, and to make sure manufacturers are ready for this. Many have already made these commitments in advance of 2035. So we're really pleased to see that. And we look to ourselves as partners really in all of this with the residents of the state, regional partners with other states who have already adopted this, and of course, partners with their businesses and the utility companies.
And when you mentioned the money coming into the state, tell me a little bit more about that. Is that federal funding, and how would that be sort of allocated to go toward either charging infrastructure or other things? Is that something the legislature would decide how it gets doled out, or is that something that would happen more maybe through the governor's administration? What's happening with that federal funding there?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Emma. And that's really a combination. So we saw a lot of dollars coming into the state from the federal government with the passage of the Infrastructure Act. Millions of dollars will be coming into the state of Connecticut. And a couple of years ago, the legislature, in anticipation of this, really worked on how we were going to set up matching funds to ensure that we were ready to take in those dollars, take advantage of those dollars. And together with DEP and the DOT, we have been working on a map to see where those chargers should go, where they're most needed. We know that there's some deserts in place as far as charging infrastructure is concerned, and we want to make sure that folks can get to where they need to be, grab a quick charge, and be on their way. We want to rid ourselves of this range anxiety that's been a problem with the EVs for a long time. So the technology is moving at a rapid pace, and Connecticut, we really want to make sure that we're ready. We sort of have a choice right now, right? We can get on the train, join others, thoughtfully map out our journey here, or we can get left behind at the station. And right now, there's so many other states who have adopted this. We really want to be strong, good regional partners who are ready for this technology that's coming on the scene, ready for the residents and consumers who are looking to a clean car future, and ready for the manufacturers who are needing the incentives and the support from us as a state.
And we saw some of those concerns being this infrastructure, being the range anxiety, being affordability. But over the past couple weeks, even those who were opposing these regulations, still agreed that climate goals are important. There are just a lot of questions remaining. Connecticut has made progress, but as you said, is falling behind and hasn't really made as much progress as a lot of people in the legislature might have wanted. So from your point of view, what are the next steps here, especially now that we saw these regulations pulled and really saw this moved as a priority for the legislature next session in February?
Well, you bring up a good point. We are in severe non-attainment from the EPA for our ozone. We have cities in the state of Connecticut that have terrible, terrible air quality, and that's resulting in health related impacts that really translates into millions of dollars for the state of Connecticut, and obviously a huge detriment to our children who are growing up in these cities and having to suffer the impacts of that bad air quality. So we really want to move this forward, but we have to recognize that there's concerns out there. So we need to address the concerns. We need to address affordability. We have been seeing, as more and more models come to market, we've been seeing a significant price drop. I would say that Connecticut has positioned itself well, recognizing that there are some cost concerns. So just a couple of years ago, as part of this initiative, we increased our cheaper rebate program, which is the electric vehicle or alternative vehicle fuel source rebates that are available to residents. So we've been making those available for not only new cars, but used cars as well. And consumers can stack that on top of federal rebates. So we're really addressing affordability there. I'd like to see us do even more in hearing some of these concerns from other legislators, particularly on the other side of the aisle. So I think we can work with that. There's also some interim checks. States like New Mexico and Colorado, who have similarly adopted these standards, they didn't go to 2035 with these regulations, but they went to 2032 as sort of like a, let's just see where we're at in 2032. Do we need to make any adjustments accordingly? And then we can, take the next steps as we need to. So these are things that we're going to be looking to as a legislature. Certainly, I will be looking at with my co-chair on the Transportation Committee in order to move these regulations forward to support the good policy that we've already put in place.
And Senator Cohen, unfortunately, that's all the time we have, but thank you so much for joining us. Still a lot of questions up in the air. I know we'll be following this as we watch this move through and now be taken up in the legislature next session. So thank you again for being here.
Thanks so much, Emma. I really appreciate it.
And stay with us here on The Real Story. We're catching up with Connecticut-based Save the Children as they bear witness to the dire state of Gaza. While a temporary pause in fighting has allowed more aid in than before, they tell us it's still not enough. We're being joined by their president and CEO next.